Greetings. I would like to share today some thoughts about the virtue of compassion. Stephen Covey, in his famous book, which is a little old now, entitled The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, tells a story. One Sunday morning, he was in New York. He got on a subway train to go downtown in Manhattan. The car was empty. He began reading his newspaper. At one stop, a gentleman boarded the train with his three or four young children. Covey sat there reading his newspaper, and he had been doing that in silence. Now the 3 children began playing, running up and down the car, yelling. And so Covey was disturbed. And the father seemed to be in a trance, just sitting there. Finally, Covey couldn't take it anymore. And so he got up and went over to the father of these children and said, "Excuse me, but I wonder if you could do something to control your children. They're running and they're yelling and they're very loud and they're disturbing other passengers." The father came out of this trance-like state that he was in and all of a sudden became aware of his surroundings and what was happening. He said to Covey, "Oh, I'm very sorry. I didn't realize what the children were doing. You see, all of us just came from the hospital where their mother died, and they don't know how to handle that. And frankly, I don't know how to handle that." Covey tells us that immediately he saw things differently. Immediately, because he saw things differently, he began to feel differently. And because of that, he began to act differently. Covey tells us, "My irritation vanished. I didn't have to worry about controlling my attitude or my behavior. My heart was filled with this man's pain." Feelings of sympathy and compassion flowed freely. Covey could only ask the gentleman how he could help. Everything had changed for him, Covey, in an instant. The great North African bishop, St. Augustine, defines the virtue of compassion as the heartfelt identification with another person's pain or distress, driving us to do what we can to help. The Greek philosopher Aristotle claimed that compassion was especially called for when misfortune afflicts a person who has not deserved it. Compassion is a feeling for someone in need. We resonate with another's pain. We sympathize. It is a strong movement of the heart, but it is also an act of the will. The compassionate woman or man is moved deeply and eventually is moved often and all the time by the pain of another. It becomes second nature to them to recognize suffering and to sense it. All of us know the range of human hurt, and while it is pretty broad, it is not always obvious. The virtue of compassion equips a person to catch on, to be aware, to be moved deeply by someone else's pain and suffering. In a very real way, a compassionate person makes the pain of another their own. But that's not all. The compassionate woman or man then dives in and works to make things better. The virtue of compassion allows someone to become skilled at detecting hurt, seeing or sensing what someone else is going through. They become, in a sense, vulnerable to the needs of another. There is a sensitivity, a tenderness, an empathy to the plight of another. A compassionate person literally takes on and makes their own another's situation. They put themselves in another's place. They walk in the shoes of another. They do it in the final analysis because the other person is a human person and in some sense can be viewed as a friend. St. Thomas Aquinas puts it this way: to one who loves, a friend is but another self, and so counts the friend's misfortunes as their own and grieves over them in the same way. A person is moved to compassion, not only at the hurt of a friend, but also that of a stranger. This happens because at some point we either have been or could be in the same situation and can know the same feeling of desperation. The gospel offers a portrait of Jesus as a very compassionate man, as a very compassionate God. Story after story, word after word showed Jesus as deeply feeling, sharing the pain of others, sensing their needs or hurts, and then doing something about it. Jesus once saw a funeral procession leaving a small village, the village of Nain. A young man had died, the only son of a widowed mother. The gospel tells us that Jesus was moved and so raised the young man from the dead and then tenderly gave him back to his mother. On another occasion, an official of the Jewish synagogue desperately begged Jesus to save his teenage daughter. When Jesus arrived at the house, a crowd of people were in mourning because the child had died. Jesus raised that young girl from the dead and gave her back to her father. Two sisters lost their brother, a friend of Jesus. Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead and gave him back to his sisters. The gospel tells us Jesus felt compassion for the hungry and fed them, for the thirsty and quenched that thirst, for the lost and the confused, and for so many others. To them all, Jesus was compassionate, a man of compassion, a God of compassion. The virtue of compassion moves against complacency, indifference, abandonment, isolation. Compassion, in fact, builds community, solidarity, and a kind of culture of sympathy. It is not the experience of pain that really determines the quality of our lives. Rather, it is how we deal with that pain and hurt, our own and that of another, and then what we do about it that really signals how worthy our lives are. The virtue of compassion leads to a kind of nobility.